Right? The biggest constitutional breach in America today, all the threats to the Second Amendment, to the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, a lot of that originates with the deep state. People use this term, the deep state. What is it? The 4+ million federal bureaucrats who are actually writing the regulations that act like laws that bind the behaviors of businesses and people across this country who were never elected to do it in the first place. See, if our founding fathers went and walked around the bureaucracies of Washington, D.C., they would find it unrecognizable. They would say, well, what's this? We set into motion a system where you have checks and balances between 3 branches of government. What's going on with all of these bureaucracies with 4 million plus people making most of the rules that bind people's lives that have zero accountability attached to them? What's going on there? That's unconstitutional. That's why it's unrecognizable. We don't need an Article 5 convention to change the Constitution to address that real threat to liberty. What we really need to do is just apply the Constitution we already have. I was at the UFC 300 fight cage side, and Mark Zuckerberg was there too, so we had a chat in between some of the fights. He's really into MMA, and so he said, we've become so neutered as a country, right? Why shouldn't we just embrace that we have these human instincts? I've grown to like MMA quite a bit, so I was like, yeah, I agree with you. I said, well, what about that with respect to speech? How do you feel about that? And then he kind of paused for a second. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I think you'd actually make the same argument for just saying that you get to say what you want in this country. We've become too neutered by trying to have central moderators of who decides what you can and can't say. And, his response was, well, look, I'm actually a lot more pro-free speech than people might know. And I've actually known a lot of his own tendencies. I believe that's actually probably true. It's about bending the knee and buckling to pressure. And so what I told him, and he said he would think about it, is if you say you're pro-free speech and you actually mean it, to just say, hey, I screwed up. Locking Donald Trump out of an account, a major president of the United States, and was making the decision under pressure, and I screwed up. If you said that, I think that would have a therapeutic effect on the country. That's a form of accountability. There's a part of us that wants vengeance, but there's also part of us that is hungry to forgive.
The FBI had a program called COINTELPRO, in which it completely trampled on the rights of Americans, open mail. And during this period, a letter was sent to Martin Luther King, who was about to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think it had some tapes of King having an affair. And the letter, which I believe was written by William Sutherland, told King that he needed to commit suicide before he accepted the Nobel Prize, or these tapes would come out. COINTELPRO was really nasty, especially with the American Indian movement and also the Black Panthers. And there's evidence that COINTELPRO definitely contributed to the death of Fred Hampton, who was a Black Panther in Chicago. But there was a member of the American Indian movement named Emery Aquash, and the FBI floated information that she was an informant, and she was murdered by 2 members of the American Indian movement because they thought she was an informant.
You don't want everything to be connected to everything else. I mean, that's part of the pathology of the modern world. We're connecting everything together. That's a little too much connection. It's insanity making. We may be driving ourselves mad with the interconnectivity online. It's a great way of educating yourself. It's a great way of having access to information. But I'll tell you, man, it's a great way of being connected to all sorts of things you don't want to be connected to. And it isn't obvious which of those is going to get the upper hand. It isn't obvious to me that Twitter could be good. Twitter is speech without responsibility. Speech without responsibility might be fatal. I'm saying that as an advocate of free speech, but there's a very big difference between free speech on Twitter and the free speech you and I are engaging in right now. You're sitting right there. There's a lot of things that I'm not going to say to you. Not because I'm hiding, but I'm going to be polite.
There would be an immediate consequence.
There would. Definitely.
There is no immediate consequence on Twitter.
Worse, the consequence of being psychopathic might be positive on Twitter.